Got to get started. We have our first 2021-2022 winter season Zoom lecture today with Keith Mearns from Historic Columbia in South Carolina. He's going to give a presentation on historic conifers and the historic gardens of Columbia today. So all yours, Keith.
Okay. I guess if my audio gets weird, just let me know. But I am thrilled to be able to talk to everybody about the conifers that we grow here and sort of our trials and tribulations and what we're trying to do going forward. So I guess a little bit about historic Columbia in general. We do manage 6 historic properties here in downtown Columbia. 4 of those have significant gardens. All of them have conifers, but there is one in particular that has far exceeding the others in the number of conifers it has, and that will be the Hampton Preston Mansion. So most of what I'll talk about will probably focus on what we have going on at that site, because it's been the most active in recent years and has the most potential, I think, for conifer diversity in the garden. And of course, at any point, if anybody wants to ask any questions, please do so. Okay, let's make sure. Yep, okay. You know, one of the questions that is good to answer, I think, is why conifers in historic gardens. And as I've read through a number of primary source documents about our sites in particular, Columbia as a city, and during our target timeframes, and I think southern gardens in general, is that conifers were considered, as they are now, graceful, majestic, and as far as I'm concerned, you know, practically speaking, back then especially, they were more expensive and difficult to care for. Obviously, they didn't have the benefit of, you know, any sort of chemical treatments, really, and they also didn't have some of the understanding that we do about soil needs and soil modification to allow certain conifers to do well where they otherwise would not. And because of this, a lot of times conifers really only did well for those who had enough money to hire a staff to take care of their gardens, who had experience, usually from Europe. So those are the reasons that I think that we end up with conifers having an important place in historic gardens. And the photo that you're seeing on this slide is of the Hampton Preston site sometime in the 19-teens or 20s. We'll move on. And this is from one of our primary source documents, and one of the things we really like to go back to make sure we're on the right track, from the Horticulturist, and it describes Columbia here itself. And obviously this is before the Civil War. As some of you may know, Columbia suffered huge fire and destruction at the end of the Civil War, and many of the would have been historic homes were lost at that point. But we do have these really nice mentions and descriptions of the town. This gives you an idea of what people were seeing pre-Civil War: camellias, not surprising, pittosporum, gardenias, and magnolias. Surprising to me in this description are the firs and spruces. As a lot of you will know, that both of those genera are really quite challenging here in Columbia, and anywhere from kind of the fall line, I would say, in the southeast towards the coast, you really get into a difficult place with those two. So While I plan maybe to dive into one or two cultivars from those genera, we haven't gotten there yet. But interesting to see that they were around then, maybe alluding to how things were a bit different climate-wise. This is one of our primary source documents, and you can find this catalog online for free from the Biodiversity Heritage Library for Palmyra Nurseries, which was a huge nursery just one county over north of here in Newberry County. The town exists there still, named after this nursery. I always like to include this fun quote that you see here. That gives us a little bit of a tie to the past. You can see that they're claiming that they have not a root of nut grass in their nursery. And I'm assuming they're talking about nutsedge here, which is really interesting, right? Because nutsedge is one of such a big problem still, but a very important source for us. And here I'm displaying just a small portion of this 90-some page catalog, where they have the hardy evergreen trees, obviously, where most of your conifers are going to reside. And you can see the diversity of their offerings. Now, obviously, some of these scientific names have been changed a number of times since 1861. But you'll notice some really things that are still considered really quite rare, like Araucaria. You see a number of ABs in there, a lot of Cupressus and Picea. Here's sort of getting through the conclusion of that evergreen tree section. A couple of pines. A number of taxus, right? Also something very interesting you don't see a lot of, but we do manage with a few taxus still. And you'll see here on the last part of the section, Wellingtonia mentioned. And in previous catalogs from this nursery, they used the name Taxodium sempervirens, which was an old name for Sequoia sempervirens. So I believe that's what he's referring to here with Wellingtonia, even though I think that name might in modern times be referring to Sequoia dendron. But anyway, very, very interesting, very essential source for us. It's where we begin when we're looking to populate new areas of the garden. We don't always limit ourselves to this, but it's definitely where we begin. I'm going to say a little bit about the Robert Mills house, and I think the Siebel's house, just to give you an idea of what those sites consist of when we're talking about conifers. The Robert Mills house is a really dynamic property. It is the only private residence that's confirmed designed by the architect Robert Mills. Though it spent most of its life as a seminary and Bible college, we do interpret that site as though the wealthy person who commissioned it had moved in. So we have this wonderful English landscape installed. And as we're renovating the gardens there, we're actually going to switch over the plants themselves to Eastern North American native plants while keeping that English landscape style. And so you can see here just some of the conifers we've got on the site now. Longleaf pine, which is relatively common here in the fall line of South Carolina, but really still not seen a lot in the ornamental landscape. Brody juniper. I do have a small Torreya taxifolia, very rare conifer from Florida, doing well for me so far. A couple of different taxodiums. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the work of David Creech down at Stephen F. Austin University, but between him and some other people, we've got a lot of really interesting taxodium cultivars. And that's great because taxodium is just so easy to grow for most of us. It's just so tolerant of adverse conditions. So we've got a couple of those, with the Taxodium ascendens Morris being a really promising plant for wide applications, I think, with its more narrow habit and its lacy foliage. And you can say I plan on adding some other things. I've got my nursery still, before they get some size on them, some Chamaecyparis there and a bunch of other plants. So an interesting site. Siebel's house, the other significant garden we have going on. The oldest house in Colombia, dating to the late 1700s. We have some conifers in here. Probably the largest conifers that we've got are on this property. The photo you see in the bottom left is of a Cedrus deodara, one of two on this property that are well over 100 years old, really quite massive at the base and still doing pretty well. With Cedrus deodara being one of the more adaptable evergreen needle conifers, it does well for us in most situations, even with the increasing heat and humidity. I got a couple other that I've plugged in there. That Cupressus is a bit of an experiment. I think that I got that from Moore Farms Botanical Gardens. And of course, Chamaecyparis gold mop, I would think that a lot of you have some experience with. I found that to be absolutely one of the most adaptable and tough conifers to have in the garden, whether as a low accent plant or a limbed up specimen. Really, really excellent, tough plant. And now we come to a description of our Hampton Preston Mansion site, which is what we'll spend most of the time on during this presentation. This is sort of a firsthand account by somebody who seemingly has really a pretty good familiarity with the scientific names of things, has been keeping up with that. So you can see that I have inserted my best guess after researching using things like tropicos.org, what the proper scientific name should be for these, and using clues from them growing here. So we believe they had the Araucaria, Araucana, and angustifolia both on site, which is backed up by them being offered by Palmaria nurseries. But what I find really interesting as well in this account is the size that is noted for most of these, right? If we have an Araucaria araucana that's 20 feet tall, it's definitely been there a while, unless of course they managed to transport a large one, which I think may be less likely than actually having it grow that high in place. We do have both of these species on the site at this point, both doing well. You can see there's a Picea, which we have not been able to bring back in. The Cupressus funebris has been one of the best Cupressus for me. Relatively simple to root, very easy to grow, and it doesn't seem to be fussy about much of anything. So we've got a lot of genera there, but just giving you a really good idea of what's going on the site that we'll be talking about a little bit more. So here are a couple of shots of the Hampton Preston site, and giving you an idea of the time frame that we're going for on this site. Really between 1840 and 1860 is the focus frame. We believe this was the height of this garden. This was a relatively famous garden in the South, even after the Civil War, when it started to degrade a bit. But a really, really interesting site. So the picture you're seeing at the top in the sepia tone is again one of the historic pictures from the turn of the century or so. The picture to the left is of the Huron Powers fountain, which is a reproduction of a fountain originally on the site. And you can see there some of the newly installed garden. This was a couple of years ago, that photo was from. And then of course the house itself. And this, this listing is what we have currently planted on the site, conifer-wise. And if the list looks tight, that I guess kind of echoes the way the garden is. A lot of these are dwarf, but a lot of them are also quite young. And you might be asking, well, how in the world could you fit these in right, in a way that makes any sense. And really the answer is in the fact that this garden is what I would call a French or Italianate style. Even though we're going for an 1840 to 1860 time frame, the garden was designed by the experiences of the Hampton family in Europe. And we believe they visited a lot of older residences, estates in Europe, many of the sort of older Italian estates where the gardens were more intimate and full of lots of specimens, and not really concerned with view shed or with massive control of the landscape, but more about how many different rare things you can grow. So all these plants are sort of nestled in amongst a lot of flowering plants, a lot of deciduous plants throughout the garden. And the garden itself is just about 4 acres. The whole site is just about 4 acres worth. And now we're gonna sort of go through, I think, some of the ones that stand out to me. I think I may have actually most of them in here. And some of them are more common, maybe to us and to people who know southern gardens, and some of them are not going to be that common. And yet, most of these, and I want to say maybe 80% of these, were available to the Hamptons at our target time frame. Cunninghamia lanceolata, many of you will know, is one of the best adapted conifers to the southeast. Really quite fast growing, and I found interestingly that a lot of the people around here somehow have applied the name monkey puzzle tree to this species, which I suppose it does resemble it, but it just surprises me how many people identify it that way and how that name sort of jumped over to this species. But here on this site, we have 2 of the glauca cultivar, which I really wish would be more readily available in the trade because it's just so easy to grow. Granted, it can make a bit of a mess directly beneath itself, but with correct siting, it's just such an easy tree to put in and lend a really significant impact to the landscape. I'm fortunate enough to be close to Moore Farms Botanical Garden, several counties away here, and I've taken multiple trips down there and taken a lot of cuttings of some really neat cultivars of conifers. And this is a Cunninghamia called Greer's Dwarf, and the picture you're seeing there is approximately half of the plant. So it rooted pretty well, but it is just so tight growing, and it's such a neat little plant that I've actually got it planted in an area of the Hampton Preston garden that we refer to as the children's garden. A lot of really interesting plants in there for texture and size. And this one is just sized perfectly for kids to have a look at. A little bit sharp on the end of those leaves, but not enough to really do much. And I think just provides really neat interest for that area. And here we are one more time with a Cedrus. Cedrus, deodara being by far and wide the easiest of the cedars to grow for us. And what you're seeing here is gold cone. It's slightly pendulous, maybe. I definitely wouldn't call it weeping, but nice, restrained. It doesn't seem to want to go sideways too much, but the leader is quite strong. And the tree you're seeing there, we actually planted that tree. I think it may have been a 25-gallon pot, but it has just about doubled its height in about 3.5 years, which is, I think it's most you can ask of a conifer, especially in our climate, to be able to do that. The other thing that I'll mention about the bed that it's planted in there is that it's part of a garden expansion on that site, on the Hampton Preston site, where we were fortunate enough to have a funding partner who gave us the means to properly sort of amend and deal with the beds that everything was going to go into. All these beds were really well tilled with, a lot of people call it a Harley rake, but it's this really neat attachment that goes onto a skid steer and really just beats up the ground. And so before all these plants, we just had grass out there. And so we really fluffed that up and tilled it up. And especially with the conifers, we really tried to plant everything slightly high. And then, bring in some sand and a little bit of really well-drained topsoil to sort of build a ramp, if you will, up to where the soil should be, just at the root flare of the plant. And I think that's really helped all the conifers we've had in, but this one has really been a standout for its growth rate. Here we have another Cedrus that's been fun. Feeling Sunny, which some of you may be familiar with. I think that I've seen this at Lowe's now, a really neat plant. But I will give you a bit of a warning. It's billed as a dwarf. And I believe that probably in colder zones, it does act like a dwarf. For me, it's been more in between dwarf and full species, because I put these in planning to have them remain as kind of a shrub, really. But I've actually been taking the leaders out here and there on a regular basis to keep it looking the way you see in this photo next to those gardenias. But it's working out well, even with having to cut out a leader here and there. I think that's not a lot to do. And it has a really nice light color to it, contrasting with a lot of other dark-leaved plants. And here's one Cedrus libanii we've actually done well with, and I'll tell you, I have my doubts about this one. A lot of the really super dwarfs can have an issue with the extreme heat that we have here. They just don't seem to be able to keep up, but this particular one has. You see we've got two of them there, the Kenwith, Cedrus Kenwith, done really pretty well, and I'm planning to keep a good bit of air circulation around them. But good drainage again is key. And here we go. So the old Chilean monkey puzzle. This picture is from a couple of years ago when we had just planted our landscape in that area. We got this tree in as a 15-gallon plant that, surprisingly enough, one of our local wholesale nurseries actually had in stock at the time. I can only imagine that most of the ones that went out did not make it because we haven't seen them around town. But one we got is still doing all right. And I think what we really focused on with this was sort of an extreme version of planting it high. We put the root ball, after we wrestled with it a bit, we actually pulled most of the soil off the roots. We found that this had been grown in a field and dug out B&B and then containerized, and the burlap had been brought up around the roots really pretty high on the trunk. So that's another really important thing, is to really examine the base of your plant, find where the root flare is, the natural root flare, and that's where you have to start when you're going to plant something. So we took most of the soil off this guy. And then we dug a relatively shallow hole, and it was the hole itself was probably less than 50% of the root mass actually went into the ground for this plant. At that point, we took some granite, sort of some granite scree that we had. We tried to dig a couple of wells on this site. Didn't work out. We didn't really find any water, but we ended up with these big piles of this really excellent sort of virgin granite. Gravel, very fine, that we then took and mixed with the native topsoil of the area. So it was probably 50-50 mix. And we took that mixture and then used that to fill from a distance away from the plant up to the root crown to really provide good drainage. Additionally, with this species, for us, the winter is the easy time. So to keep it properly drained during the summer, when we get all our sort of torrential rainfall, we made sure that the pop-up sprinklers in the bed actually don't water this tree at all. for us at any point in the year. So it survives completely on rainfall. And the plant you see behind it, just there on the ground, is actually a bottle brush. That does get a little bit of irrigation, but just maybe to give you an idea of what other kind of plants, what kind of water needs this thing really needs, and it's really not much. And I think any more than that would probably be detrimental to this species, especially. And we realize that even with the measures we've done so far on this, that we may lose it eventually to Phytophthora. And so at some point here in the near future, I would like to do a little bit of experimentation with grafting. I know that some people have actually attempted to graft this species onto Orientalis angustifolia, which doesn't have those root issues, to give you a plant that is Auricana on top and angustifolia roots. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. Okay, and here's the angustifolia. Believe it or not, this was donated to us from somebody who heard about our research that we were doing for the garden. Came from their backyard, believe it or not. And it was in the shade here in Columbia. It wasn't doing real well in the shade, and it was in a real sharp, sandy area and almost no soil. It was like 100% sand, and it was doing okay in those conditions. They donated it to us, and it has, I would say, not quite doubled its height in the past 5 years. And you can see how dense it's grown in the crown. Even given its youth, it's already seemingly beginning to take the candelabra form of the genus, so distinct to the genus. This one, not quite as reptilian, maybe not as dramatic as Araucaria auricana, but much easier to grow. I mean, you can hear the thing growing. It's growing so much, so it's really an interesting tree. One that I see no reason why it should be much more widely used in a specimen fashion. Probably not something to put on your street side anywhere, but a really neat plant to put as an accent in your garden. Another genus that you may not think we would done great with, and I guess I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure what genus it's supposed to be in. I think Callitropsis was the last thing I saw. It may be back in Camaecyparis now. One of the ones that's been doing a lot of movement there. But we've got Jubilee.
Cupressus.
What's that?
It's Cupressus.
Is it in Cupressus? Okay. I'll have to make that change again. So Cupressus nootkatensis. Jubilee has done well for me, if exceedingly slow, but it has done well. And as you can see in the photo, it actually gets really only half-day sun at best. And a nice sort of sandy loam that it's in. Minimal irrigation. Kind of the same situation for Jubilee, though the Jubilee is a bit of a younger plant in the garden so far, but hasn't shown any stress issues yet. So we're hopeful for that. Calocedrus. So this is an interesting one that kind of has a place in older gardens. You drive around the state here, and I think around the South, and if you go through the towns that have older gardens, quite often you'll see maybe one or two of these around town, and the trunk will be huge, and the tree might not be too tall, and it probably looks not so good up top. So it was very popular to plant, but maybe at this point not, and seemingly maybe difficult to get established. As you can see, we have the Aureo variegata cultivar, and it's done well so far. Again, drainage I think is key, and honestly, I'll say that most of these conifers you're seeing on this site are pretty well surrounded, though not necessarily touching, but surrounded by a lot of broadleaf plants. I believe just having those plants there, shading the ground, number one, And number two, providing evapotranspiration to probably cool the air at least a bit. It's hard for me to tell in the middle of the summer, where there's any difference in those gradients. But I think it does seem to make a difference for some of the plants that otherwise maybe would have a difficult time. As you can see, I don't have a picture of gold dragon. So Cephalotaxus, extremely useful conifer as a shrub for us. I have a couple really tiny ones that I got from Mr. Tom Cox that are seedling grown and have a nice leader, but they're just so small I couldn't get a great picture. Gold Dragon is one that I've got in to see how well it performs versus, say, the Drupacia cultivar or any of the other harringtonias. It hasn't shown its gold color just yet, but it's doing okay. This one has been a surprise for me. A lot of the Lawson cypress don't tolerate much of anything about our area. But as it turns out, these three Whistle saguaros are actually in the same spot as the Cupressus nootkatensis Jubilee. And you can see they're getting there, they're already into the shady part of their day in this photo. So I think that helps. And the shade that's being provided here is coming actually from live oak trees, believe it or not, that we've limbed up from the ground such that they get good air circulation. And here's honestly, one of my favorite species. Between Camaecyparis obtusa and Camaecyparis piscifera, those two are really, really tough for me. And this photo kind of looks like one of the ones you might see from, I don't know, Conifer Kingdom or somebody where they have so many conifers, but this came out of our garden and these are in full sun. They are on a very dry berm and they get minimal irrigation. So I'm really impressed with this species and with this cultivar in general. This is Elmwood Gold. I do have Tetragona aurea. Wasn't able to get a great shot of that, just given the light angle for the year, but Elmwood Gold has really been impressive to me. Here we have Piscifera, and we've got, believe it or not, these represent two different cultivars. So the one on the left in the center picture are both gecko, and the one to the right there is snow. And I found that at least these color forms of this species tend to like a little bit of protection from full midday sun. So that's why you're seeing these in the shade. And actually the snow is in pretty heavy shade, but still doing pretty well. And not entirely lanky, but I think doing well for the shady position. One of our easier conifers, though you don't see enough mature ones, I don't think, or at least taken care of. Cryptomeria japonica. A number of these on the site there at Hampton Preston, really diverse and pretty easy to propagate, actually. So what you see in the far right corner there is mushroom, which is really a fun one that gets a lot of attention from visitors for its forever juvenile state. It's just such a fuzzy, soft, almost seaweed looking plant, really neat. And the one in the center is Owl's Blue, which even late in the year, as you can see, still has a blue cast to the needles, which, a lot of the cultivars billed as blue don't turn out that way for us. A lot of them tend to green out. I'm not sure what happens exactly to the wax that causes the blue coloration, but this one holds it pretty well, and extremely vigorous as well. And here you see one of the neatest Cryptomerias, Rasen, or Rasen Sugi, I think you'll hear it sometimes. And so you see the close-up there on the left of the foliage, similar to Spiralia falcata, but maybe the stem growth is a bit straighter, has more rigidity, and you can see the entire plant there on the right We had staked up for maybe 2.5 years, and then we took the stake off, and it has held itself since, and is now starting to ascend on its own, but really sort of Dr. Seussian look. And here's Spiralia falcata in a very young state, but I think going to be an interesting kind of an edge to one of our planting beds, a loose ferny edge, and we'll see how that goes. Now, finally, one of the failures. You all may be familiar with what's happening there on the right side. Cupressus macrocarpa grows well for us until it doesn't. So this one has the needle blight so common to the species. This actually just showed up on my Donner Gold this year. So I'll be looking for replacements for that guy. I don't foresee myself attempting to treat any of those issues. So I'm probably going to replace him. But it looked great before that happened. And this is right next to one of the more interesting species, Torullosa, which I also got from Tom Cox originally. And this one is planted, and it looks a bit shady, and that's because it's actually in place to replace an old Cedrus deodara that's only just next to it, that is more or less dead, and I've got this in there as a replacement, already getting its feet under it. Growing really well, you can see for that much shade, minimal irrigation again, but a really vigorous species, and the blue color is really nice. Oh, sorry, forgot to move the pictures around here on this one. So Ginkgo, we've got really just one cultivar on the Ginkgos, but the one you can kind of see in the center there, is just a regular seedling grown male Ginkgo that looks really good for us every fall. And then the one on the right is Sunstream. And then the picture doesn't look great, but I thought it was interesting to show that variegated cultivars often have issues in the full sun, and here we are with Ginkgo Sunstream burning there a bit as a young tree in the full sun, so I'll probably be moving him to the shade. Number of Juniperas here in the garden, with Juniperus virginiana being probably the easiest to deal with, as it would be for most of you, I think. We have two weeping cultivars, which I wouldn't call strict weepers. They don't go straight down from the trunk, more of a pendulous form. We've got Hancock's weeping, which is what you're seeing there in the picture to the right, and then Woodlander's weeping. So Hancock's weeping has been very, very vigorous. I think this plant originated as a 1 gallon plant 5 years ago, and is now just enormous, really quite vigorous. And then over there to the left, you're seeing one of the carpet junipers, Conferta Silver Mist, beautiful blue color, nice and vigorous, and about half-day sun. And here's two of the other junipers we have going. Juniperus chinensis Troutman there on the left side. That is touted as a replacement perhaps to Cupressus sempervirens. More or less in the garden as an upright, tight conifer, I would say it is. Now, you can see that the texture isn't exactly a match, but it's grown well for us. There to the right is one of the Rocky Mountain junipers, Juniper scopulorum. This one's Wichita blue. As you can see, is retaining its nice blue color. It has more or less full sun. This is a late day shot, so it's getting some very, very late shade. And even with that, it's still got a bit of a hole there on the side. So I'll have to be watching that to see how that progresses. One of the more interesting and I think graceful of the options that we have on Juniperus rigida pendula. This plant coming originally from the nursery Woodlanders in Aiken, South Carolina. And this is, believe it or not, planted underneath a pecan tree. very tall pecan tree. So it's getting what I like to refer to as high shade. Shade cast by a canopy that's very high overhead is in my mind the best shade, because it's kind of this excellent bright light for most of the day. This does get a shot of morning sun, but otherwise growing in the shade. So really neat. And here we have the Woodlander's Weeping Juniperus virginiana, which you might be able to see there's actually 4 plants there, 4 of them, which we are, as they get larger, going to sort of pull together over that pathway to make something of a living arbor. Just an idea that we had. I think it's going to work out. They're strong plants, and so I think it's going to be a nice addition to the garden to sort of mimic the wooden arbors that you see behind it. So we know that taxodium was available to the Hamptons, so we went ahead and just took a riff on that and included a metasequoia. We actually have 2 metasequoia in the garden. We have Sherman's Nordlicht, which you'll see incorrectly offered as Northlight a lot. And then we have Silhouette. So the one on the right there is Sherman's Nordlicht, which is a wonderful shrub form of metasequoia. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as a dwarf. I wouldn't refer to it that way, because the growth is very robust. It just doesn't seem to want to make a leader per se. So one of the things I've thought about and suggested to people is that I think that in some places deciduous hedges are coming into vogue again, and this will be a really interesting choice for that, given its form, and it's just so lush. Silhouette is a great vigorous cultivar that in the early spring, when it's making its first flush, the foliage does have something of a variegated look to it. It has more white in the leaf and the branchlets. So Pinus, not a lot of Pinus on the site. Here's some shots of the Oregon green, Pinus nigra Oregon green I've got that's doing okay. It's kind of coming up through a sorry. Oh, we got some Mexican marigolds there behind it in the children's garden. I placed it there because it's kind of a neat little plant. It's funny, they were selling these at some of our local nurseries as a Charlie Brown Christmas tree in their containers. They sort of look that way in a 3-gallon container, but it's done well so far. We know they had access to this species. As you can see, we do have a Pinus strobus pendula, and I'll tell you what, I've been struggling to try to get a photo of that thing for the past 4 days. It's doing very well for us. It's just in a spot where I can't get a lot of contrast on the foliage with my camera, but it's been very vigorous for a white pine. It gets shade until maybe 11 o'clock, and then it's in full sun. And again, I think due to the fact that we have appropriate irrigation and good drainage, it's doing really well. Oops. Another really good genus and species for us, Platycladus orientalis. There you see Orianana on the right. That is in live oak shade. Now, albeit, like I said, I did limb up our live oaks so that we have a lot of space underneath them. But that plant there in live oak shade. So, you know, a lot of times people think, well, what conifers can you really grow in the shade? And usually it's kind of stops at Tsuga or maybe Thuiopsis. But I've found that at least Orianana and Platycladus as well. There you see in the center, Frankie Boy, really fun thread or needle conifer, needle version of the species. This one is top grafted. That you can't see it anymore because it's grown so much. In our children's garden, again, really neat plant there with the Pitosides beneath it. This one gets morning sun only. Podocarpus, maybe this is the easiest conifer we can grow. And we have, I have a couple of them at the site. Here you're looking at on the right, Royal Flush, which, as you can see, flushes out with this really neat coral red color. And then Sunshine Spire there in the center, I haven't been able to find much info on it, but it seems very tight. I haven't touched that plant since I put it in, and you can see how short the side branches are. So I'm hoping it's going to be a nice vertical accent in the bed there. This is Podocarpus lowrider, which I found even less information about than Sunshine's Fire. This does seem to me to be actually a true dwarf. Very slow for the species. Actually kind of sat there and stared at me for about a year and a half before it even put much growth out. So an interesting form, and we'll see how that progresses. One species that some of you may or may not have experience with, if you come from a place where larix is popular, the true larches, and then you move down south and you figure out, well, we can't really grow larches much below the upper Piedmont or the mountains down here. This is a neat alternative. It still doesn't work for everybody, but is a really neat tree, Pseudolarix amabilis, or the false larch. And the color you're seeing there in the foliage is more or less the color you see all year. It has kind of a golden color to it as a species, at least for us in the South. And my plant gets a little bit more than half a day of sun, maybe, doing well for me. Here's one that's a bit more rare. As it turns out, when we were populating the site, we saw this on one of our availabilities from a nursery. And I thought, well, let's give it a try. Sciatopides. So Joe Cozy, I'll tell you that this hasn't changed a whole lot since we put it in about 4 years ago. And you can see the whole tree there on the right. It's in more or less full day sun. And the reason I give you the close-up here is not just to show you how good the leaves look, but you can see the bright green new stems there, just to give you an idea of how much growth put on this year, which for the species, I think is pretty significant. So I'm kind of excited about the future for this one. This species is one I really like to point out to our tours, our garden tours that we have. We know for a fact that the Pomeroy nurseries offered this species. There's a large one in town here. There's a huge one in Abbeville, South Carolina, that we believe came from Pomeroy nurseries. And so we have a number of these on site, and the two that are on this page are the more dwarf versions, Mount Loma Prieta Spike and Albospica. The one on the left is Albospica. That's about as alba as the branch tips get for me. And then we've got the Mount Loma Prieta Spike over there, which is finally starting to make a leader. And this is our Simpson Silver. Close up of the foliage, not so silver for us, but I think closer to a bluish color than would be the straight species. Extremely vigorous plant. This plant puts on at least 3 feet, if not 4 feet a year for me. With really good irrigation, goes very fast for us, which is interesting because the plant, you see growing this in California, Sequoia dendron, absolutely a no-go for me at this point. So interesting that 2 plants growing together, one of them does well for us and one doesn't. And there's another shot of Simpson Silver. A bit hard to get a shot of that right now. This is one really interesting tree. So this is a hybrid taxodium. And this is a result of the work of the gentleman I mentioned earlier, David Creech in Texas. This is a hybrid between Taxodium disticum, which is our native bald cypress, and the Taxodium mucronatum, the Mexican bald cypress. You might ask, well, what's the point, right? Why you want to hybridize those two? As it turns out, SFA, University in Texas, and then I want to say the Nanjing Botanical Garden in China have had programs breeding these. It's very, very popular in China as an urban tree, which makes a lot of sense. And the only issue they had with it were the knees produced by the roots. Obviously a big problem for any sort of hardscaping. As it turns out, the Mexican species does not make the knees. So the hybridization is to find a plant where you don't have the knees, but also you have the cold hardiness from the northern genes. So this is one of the results of that program, an insanely vigorous plant. Now, you won't believe me, but we planted this plant as a 1 gallon plant 4.5 years ago, and now it's pushing 40 feet. So it's kind of scary, but a really neat plant. And one feature it also gets from the Mexican parent is that it does not want to lose its branchlets. It will hold on to those until January, until we really get some significant cold, and it will finally lose them, and then they'll come back out again as soon as it warms up significantly. So an interesting plant. And here we have the couple of taxus that we can actually do, that I've been able to do. The first one on that list, you won't see a picture of because it's almost gone. So the Taxus emerald spreader has not done well, where interestingly enough, in the same species there, Taxus cuspidata, Rezex gold has done fine. We got these as tiny little plants from Buchholz nurseries, and you can see that it's already put on a couple of inches of growth there, doing well in a little bit less than half-day sun. And then the last one there on the list that I've got as a species, because I haven't gone to the trouble to identify the species yet, we got it donated to us from a local gentleman who has since passed away, unfortunately, but he propagated these from his own garden, and we've got them in ours now, and it has no trouble at all. So really do need to get on the identification of that. Not a lot of taxus that do great for us. Thuius, widely adaptable most of the time, usually painfully slow for us, in my experience. So De Groot Spire there on the far right, pretty widely available cultivar. Jantar there in, again, live oak shade, actually doing pretty well. Golden Globe has been a really good one. I actually rooted these myself from plants at Riverbanks Botanical Garden. And for a rooted conifer have done really, really well. Gold form in the full sun, no bleaching, really nice. I actually have a very small Thuja coriensis. So small, in fact, that I can't get a great picture to make any sense to you, but it's doing well so far. Probably the other best cultivar for shade, at least species of conifer for shade, Thujaopsis dolibrata. And I will say that the variegata there is also a cutting I got from Mr. Cox, and it's done really excellent. It started out really tiny, and it's for a variegated cultivar, taking off really well, and hopefully it's going to be making a statement in the bed it's in soon. And then Aurea there to the right, really nice light chartreuse color for shade. And we do have some Suga. I show you the ones that are having a bit of a time first. We got these from one of the American Conifer Society meetings. So we've got here on the right, West Coast Creeper, and then on the left is Jetalo. So West Coast Creeper doing okay. Jetalo, maybe not. And I think I've given some consideration to transferring these guys to some large containers, maybe instead of being directly in the ground. Get a little bit more visibility and a little bit more air circulation. Here we have what is sold as Golden Duke. Really nice. It was really, really super bright when we first bought it. It has since sort of transferred to a more chartreuse color, but in dappled shade all day and still vigorous. Still really vigorous. So we've been happy with that. Okay. Make sure we didn't miss anything. I think we did. At this point, I guess I want to make sure that I haven't missed any questions, or anybody has anything to ask or talk about. As I said, most of the ones we've talked about here are on the Hampton Preston site. If you're ever here in Columbia, all our gardens are free and open to the public Tuesday to Sunday. So you can come in here and see these guys in person. And I believe I'll make sure that Jeff has my contact info, because I'm always around for the most part. Anyway, so does anybody have any questions?
if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or unmute or put them in there or use the space bar. There's not many of us here at the moment, so.
Oh,
Well, we have 30, we're up to 37, which wasn't too bad. The weather is kind of nice today for, I think, most of the country.
yeah.
Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Tom Cox. First, I want to give a plug to Keith's wonderful gardens. Evelyn and I had an opportunity, the pleasure to go up a few years ago, and Keith was his usual gracious self. And gardens are quite interesting and historic. And also, while you're there, you should go over to Riverbanks Zoo, another very interesting botanical garden. So you really get a 2-for-1 there.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, Keith, a couple of notes. One, on the Podocarpus sunshine spire. That came out of University of Florida in Gainesville. The parent plant is about, I would say, 25, 30 feet tall, perfect spire.
Wow.
And so it's, if I were rewriting the book today, one of the things I would say for the South is we missed the boat down here on Podocarpus. It's a wonderful genus in the Southeast, and sunshine spire probably gets more oohs and ahs than a lot of conifers that are not Podocarpus. So it's a great plant.
Yeah.
Next thing, I had a question on your Calocedrus decurrens Ariel variegata. Is that getting a lot of moisture?
It does. It's interesting, you know, it's getting a little bit less as the days go on. As we installed those beds, we had pop-up heads in there to make sure everything got watered when it was small. And that Calocedrus is currently kind of surrounded by forsythia, which is increasingly blocking any direct spray that plant gets. You know, I check the soil around and try to pay attention to see if I see any water stress or anything like that, and I don't. So I haven't been concerned about trying to increase its access to the irrigation. So and then over time, we're just going to decrease the irrigation in general as things become established. So
it looks good. As you may recall, you shared one with us, which is still living and looks quite vigorous. So one of my favorite plants actually is the Ariel variegata. You just don't see that plant anywhere.
I think that we got this one as a tiny one from book oats as well.
Cool plant. Last comment on your Araucaria araucana. You might try drenching those with something like Subdue to combat the Phytophthora. We're able to grow Franklinia as well as we actually lost our Araucaria araucana. It just died during the summer. So it's a hardy plant, but it is very susceptible to Phytophthora, as you know. But you might try drenching that just to hedge your bets.
Yeah, as a preventative, it's a good idea.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Steve. Cliff Haugen here up in suburban Philadelphia. Great presentation. They're lucky to have a conifer geek like you. I wonder if they knew what they were getting into when you joined the team. On the drench subject, I've recently seen some commentary on using Zerotol, which is believe it or not a hydrogen peroxide product that apparently has been pretty effective on maples. Might be something to think about on that monkey puzzle. Also, copper sulfate is a pretty low impact, pretty, you know, not too awful chemical that's been shown to be a pretty good drench. I think your Golden Duke probably needs a little more sun.
To show the color a little better.
Yeah, it's obviously very happy where it's at, but I think that's going to want more sun to get any color on it. I've got some golden hemlocks, and I've tried part shade with them, and they just turn green on me. You know, they were gold when I got them, they turn green, then I have to move them to someplace with more sun, and the gold comes back pretty quickly when they get a little more sun. Now, I don't have the southern heat that you do, so I've got a little bit more flexibility, but that one just looks like it wants a little more light.
Yeah, and it's We're due for another. I'm due for another round of pruning on the live oaks too, because that is a situation that never ends. They're always fighting to get to the ground. So
I've had great luck with Frankie Boy. They get big. That thing just keeps growing and growing. I've seen it as a thuya. You had it in a genus I wasn't familiar with. I could be wrong, but might want to check the genus on that one.
which one? I'm sorry.
The Frankie Boy.
Oh, Platycladus.
Yeah, I've seen that in the thuya gene. I mean, they move these things around. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, it's something I try to check on when every time I put a new round of pictures into my database. I usually check on synonymies because they do move around. Okay. All right. I don't think I see any other questions in the chat. So again, if anybody wants to reach out about anything, please don't hesitate to email me.
Let me ask a question about the last discussion. What was the name of that drench that was being discussed? Otal? I'm not sure I got that name right.
I had mentioned a product called, I think, Zertol, like short for zero, Zertol. Came across it in a maple discussion, looked it up. It's mostly hydrogen peroxide, pretty high concentration, and they said it's been great for Phytophthora and it works as a drench. And it's it's not a poison. It's just hydrogen peroxide. They also use it in hydroponics.
Thanks. I just hadn't heard of that, and I think my hearing was slow to catch up on what you said. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith. That was wonderful. Hale also mentioned in the chat that it was great seeing how well some of the conifers can take the heat in our definitely ever increasing hot southern climate. So that was great presentation, and also a great presentation by several people. So I really appreciate it. I wish we could have gotten down there last March, but it's definitely on our list to still visit you. Hopefully we can make it a big rendezvous / informal meeting with a whole bunch of people in a group.
Yeah.
And how's your greenhouse coming, by the way? I know you're building a new one, right?
Right. Yeah, I didn't take much time. We are we're on schedule for a new glass house reproduction to be completed by the end of February. So very exciting. It'll have space for meetings in it. So
then we're definitely gonna.
Yes, we definitely have to come and check out the greenhouse. That's going to be awesome. So if that's it for everybody, I want to once again say thank you. It was fabulous. Really appreciate it.